let's talk about EEVEE. First of all, I just want to kind of clarify. I do not feel qualified to just mention EEVEE because I've rarely used it ever. Um, but yeah, I've just started getting into it quite a bit, and it turns out it's pretty powerful, to be honest. But with that out of the way, let's get into it. I'll just kind of share what I've learned, and hopefully you guys can kind of take something away from it. So I've been using cycles for most 99% of my work, just because I do have a pretty powerful GPU that can handle rendering in reasonable time. Compared to a lot of other people who don't have that freedom and kind of have to use EEVEE. I would still though recommend using cycles because it depends on what you're doing, but if you're going for realism, which I think most of people are doing, cycles is definitely easier and gives way better results without any tweaking. So this is the regular EEVEE settings. So if I just go into render mode, I mean, it looks pretty okay, to be honest. But let's make a little example room that we can kind of use to demonstrate EEVEE. So I'll just make this I'll make it black, yeah. And I'll make a little room here, like that. So if I now would go in and add a light source, a point light, let's see where EEVEE kind of falls apart. So let's compare this to cycles. I'll do a little quick render here. Render image, and obviously EEVEE is pretty darn fast, which is really nice. And we have cycles over here, and I'll render that out. And we shall see and compare the difference between them. So right off the bat, we can see that EEVEE is way darker, and these shadows look really funky. What's going on? No contact shadows at all. Looks like he's kind of floating on the heels or something. And his back here is just completely dark. And that's because EEVEE doesn't really support global illumination. Which is when light comes here, bounces off the wall, and then goes here. That's global illumination, and that's basically ray tracing, and that's what cycles is doing. It's simulating the light bouncing around, basically. So we want to kind of replicate this effect in EEVEE, and how do we do that? Well, there are a bunch of settings we could turn on. So let's go in here. First of all, ambient occlusion, and it's not too easy to see, but if I would kind of crank the distance up, it's barely visible. But basically in crevices and stuff like that, it will add a little bit of extra shadow. You cannot even tell. We'll basically we want to have that on. It'll probably be more visible later. And about bloom, I usually tend to stay away from that as much as possible. So if I would have this light be a lot stronger, this whole thing would look, yeah, that does not look realistic at all, because it wouldn't really glow that much. So I would probably just bring down the radius quite a bit, and also the intensity, so we just get a little bit of that nice glow there. Okay, so let's bring back the light here, intensity 20 maybe. So we can see that these shadows look a little funky, and we'll get into that. But the most important feature is the screen space reflections, and that will kinda add a little bit of that bounce lighting fakeish stuff, and that's gonna really make it a lot better. But it's still not as intense, and it's not really too good. And if we turn on refraction, that's gonna enable window stuff. I'm not too good at that stuff. Motion blur, obviously, because we want motion blur. And in the shadows, we have a little feature we can tick, and that's the cube size. So if we crank that up, that's gonna increase the detail in the shadows. So if I would have this at 16, you can see it's very jagged. So we want to have that as high as possible and check high bit depth. So they still look very weird. That's because our samples are really low. You can see if we just crank that up, we get some better shadows. But his feet look really funky because there are no like shadows. You can see how they kind of clip away here. That's not always good. So I believe there's a setting in the light that allows allows you to just hit contact shadows, and that's gonna add some nice contact shadows there. So make sure all your lights have contact shadows enabled, so you get those contact shadows. Still not perfect. So one thing that is really important to do that a lot of people kind of gloss over, and that is the irradiance volume. So it will basically take samples from the different areas. I'm not too sure how this all works, and it will kind of bake in the lighting in a more realistic way. So let's render out what this looks like before irradiance volume, render image, and we'll check how it looks after we bake it. So you just go here into indirect lighting, bake indirect lighting, and now we shall see the difference. You can see how all this bounce lighting is getting kind of mimicked here, before, after, and it already looks so much better. If we would compare this to cycles, you can see that like there's not too big of a difference, which is awesome. And if you really want to take this one step further, you can go into the settings. You have to enable an add-on. I'll link that in the description. It's called SSGI for EEVEE, and I think you have to have materials on. I'm not too certain, but add SSGI, and that's going to convert all these into SSGI stuff, and it will kind of try to mimic bounce lighting, but it can be a little funky and really noisy at times. As you can see, the bounce lighting seems to be like really intense here, like it's almost glowing. Maybe that's the bloom, definitely not. So there are ways to crank the intensity. So we just want to have a little bit of that. No, it's still looking weird. Sometimes this works, sometimes it just doesn't, but it will try to replicate bounce lighting basically. Might be because we have a baked lighting thingy here. If we would delete that, delete lighting cache, definitely not. Okay, so just don't mind SSGI, and you just want to bake the lighting, and that's like the big part, because that's gonna make it look way better. So if your object is like not within the whole lighting thingy, it's not gonna get all the bounce lighting. So if you have a big area, it will be more intense, and you'll have to bake more stuff with your radiance volume. But I didn't even know this thingy existed. But it really allows you to get like more realistic results with EEVEE. As we saw here, like that's pretty darn close, to be honest. And I mean, the render times just took 8 seconds on a fucking 3090, and this took 4 seconds, like on a CPU, which is like really good. And you kind of get the same results. So if you're gonna be doing EEVEE stuff, just make sure that you have all these settings turned on, and especially all the lights turned on to like contact shadows. I don't know why that's not a default setting enabled, because it makes it look way better. We'll see how, if we can see like the ambient occlusion feature a little more. Yeah, you can see here how like it kind of darkens the edges. Like it's not too visible, but it gets a little bit of darkening, like it's contact shadows. It's trying to mimic that whole thing. But I mean, yeah, like it's pretty nice, to be honest. If we compare that to the first like test we did before all the settings and after, it's a big difference. Yeah, this does not look realistic whatsoever, and this one kind of does. And if you just add a bunch of post processing and grain and all that, you can definitely do a bunch of stuff in EEVEE. Yeah, that's all I wanted to show. Just a quickie video, and hopefully y'all can kind of use this in the future. And yeah, have a good one. Bye.